When you guys first got there, what did you run into? What kind of a mess or what kind of an interesting, different way of life or whatever did you guys run into?
We arrived in Armenia. Well, as we're flying in, looking out over the capital of Armenia, we saw maybe 3 or 4 lights. When we landed at the airport, there was snow on the ground. We had to walk from the airplane into the airport. There were no lights, there was no heat. We just sat down on some concrete steps waiting for this Armenian who went by the name Jerry, who was supposed to pick us up.
Well, we had to go through immigration and
Yeah,
then
we
get
had
our
to
luggage, and
do all
that
of
took
that.
about 3 hours to do that. And we're sitting on concrete steps in the terminal just waiting for them to do all this. It was the old terminal. They had a new terminal there, but this was an old terminal that's all they were using then.
Then Jerry took us to his home. It was like 6 o'clock in the morning, and his wife had cooked all of this Armenian food, which we had no idea what it was like. And I was just so tired and so cold, and I just wanted to go to sleep. But we graciously ate the food and thanked her, and then he took us up. Roger and Jewel Doxey had rented a big home, and we lived with them for 3 weeks until we found an apartment of our own. Roger was asked to go over to manage this plant by John Huntsman, and they were very gracious to let us live in their home, where we also about froze to death. We had no heat. Nobody had any heat in Armenia. The gas lines had been cut off going through Georgia into Armenia. We had, if we were lucky, 1 hour of electricity a day or night, never knowing when. Water was rationed. We got an hour of water in the morning and an hour of water in the afternoon. So we had to fill containers with water. We found life very hard over there. When we found our apartment, it was up on the third floor of this apartment building. Oh, we were on the 4th floor, I'm sorry.
3rd floor. No, we were on the 3rd floor.
And the front door was wet wood. It had been taken off to burn. Any wood on the railings going up the stairs was gone. We lived across the street from a park. All the park benches that were wooden were gone. And every once in a while we'd hear kind of a banging noise. And that was another tree being cut down so people could get some wood. They put these little wood burning stoves in their home, which was very bad for them because the smoke from that was not good for their health. And here it is, January 6th, we arrived on the Armenian Christmas Day. So that was a surprise.
Yeah.
And we lived in those conditions all the time. In the summer, it was difficult because it was hot and there was no air conditioning. We actually had a wonderful view out our window. We had a Mount Ararat right there to look at. Mount Ararat, where Noah's Ark landed. It was actually in Turkey. We were not too far from the Turkish border. We found the Armenian people extremely friendly. They were curious what we Americans were doing over there when conditions were so bad. And we could not wear badges and we could not proselyte. But we said, well, we are missionaries for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And their next question to us was, would you please baptize us?
Wow.
And we said, we have to teach you first. The Armenian people accepted Christianity as their religion in 1305.
305.
305, I'm sorry, in 305 AD. So they were a Christian nation, believed in Jesus Christ. Many times teaching them, sometimes tears would just stream down their face, and they would say, I know that's true. I've always known that was true. Roy worked at the plant every day. Before he went to the plant, he went to a school where he taught engineering, and he can tell you about that. Then he went out to work all day. So being a sister missionary, no companion, I just went by myself. If I needed a ride to go somewhere, I would go just stand not on the street, but on the curb by the street, and I would hold my right hand straight out with the palm at the back. And pretty soon, some car would come and stop. And I would get in the car and ask if they could take me and give them the address. And they would always take me there. I had no idea who I was getting in a car with. I don't think I was ever in a taxi. They would always not let me pay them any money for it. They just were happy to do that for this American.
What kind of destinations would you give them? Like, what were some of the places that you wanted to go?
Well, I needed to go down to where the trolley, or not the trolley, the underneath subway
underground
was, or just to go to somebody's home or whatever.
One of the other missionaries' apartments.
So I felt very safe over there. As I was walking around the park, getting my exercise, there was a mother and a daughter sitting on a bench. The second time I passed them, the girl said, "How do you do?" And I said, "Oh, you speak English?" And she said, "A little." I said, "I teach English classes in my apartment, which is right up here in this building on the 4th floor." And I told her the day and the time. And she and her mother showed up to my English class. The mother slept, and she learned English. They lived up in Gyumri when the earthquake hit. She was in school up in the 2nd floor. And the teacher was yelling to the children, "Jump out the window, jump out the window." When it was her turn to jump out, she was so frightened, but she felt like somebody gently pushed her shoulders, and she jumped out and was not hurt. Her mother and her grandma and she ended up in an old apartment building, hotel there in Yerevan, just down the street from the park. And all the rest of her family were killed in the earthquake. They have a cemetery there where only those who were killed in the earthquake are buried. It's just haunting. You look at the death date, and every date is the same.
What date was that?
December 7th, 1988. And there's thousands of graves, one right after the other. Lots of birth dates, but the death date is all the same death date.
And that was due to what?
The earthquake
Oh, yeah.
and the collapse of these buildings.
What was the Richter scale? Do we know?
7.4, something like that, or 7.3, 7.4 earthquake. Was really a severe
Yeah,
earthquake.
that's about the magnitude they had in Northridge,
Yeah.
California.
Yeah.
Back then.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was a good shaker, that one was it. When we said we didn't have any electricity or power, the very interesting thing about that whole scenario over there was that Armenia had a nuclear power plant, has a nuclear power plant. Now it was similar to Chernobyl. So they produced enough electricity out of that power plant for their own use, plus exported it to Eastern Europe. So it had a pretty good source of income for them to export power, electricity, all to these, so Romania, Hungary, and a lot of those countries to the west of them, they exported power to them. But when they became independent after the fall of the Soviet Union, and they became independent, a lot of these people who were running for president, part of their platform, we're going to close down that nuclear power plant because it's dangerous for our people. So they were elected, and that's what they did. They closed the power plant down. Well, they didn't decommission the power plant. They just locked the doors on the front of the power plant and shut it down. So you have all this nuclear waste, all the nuclear rods, everything is in there. But now it's not being used and nobody's there to watch and take care of it. So now it's a bigger hazard than it was while they were using it. And so when we first got there, of course, this was the condition. And of course, then as the year rolled around and the next year, the European countries said, look, you got to either decommission that power plant or put it online again, because you can't just leave it sitting there.
Yeah.
It's too dangerous.
Right.
Well, they didn't have the money to decommission it. And so a lot of the Western European countries gave money to the nuclear regulatory body there, and they went in then and started to restart up the plant again. So now it's running again. So for about 3 years, that was a problem. They had no electricity. And that's the year and a half we were there, that was the whole time. And then when we went back to teach, it was the same thing again. After the third year we went back, or the third time we went back, they had started to put power online, and they were checking the plant out, and so the power would come on for several days or a week, and then they'd shut it down to do some stuff, and then it would come back on again. So when we went back in '99 for that project, we had power all the time then. The electricity was on pretty much full time then. But that's, it was sort of it's like, duh, what are you going to do for electricity if you shut this? Because they only had about 5% of their electrical power was hydroelectric. They had a couple of hydroelectric plants on there, but only about 5% was that. And then they had a couple of gas generation plants, because they had natural gas came in from over in Turkmenia through Azerbaijan and Georgia down into Armenia.
Okay.
And they were generating electricity with that, but that was again only about 5%. Well, then they went to war with Azerbaijan and they cut the pipelines for the gas, and so they had no gas to produce electricity. So that's why we only got electricity about 1 hour. It was kind of a rolling blackout, so everybody got about an hour of electricity a day through the city.
The second winter, we were there in the fall, Roy found a kerosene heater for sale out on the street, and he bought that. So, then he went and bought a metal bucket. So we put a big plastic tub inside of our bathtub. We would fill it with some cold water, but he would put the heater turned on in the bathroom with the door shut, and after a while we had the hot water. So we would have enough hot water. Then we had a big plastic scoop thing, and we would get ourselves wet and would soap up and rinse off, and that's That's how we would shower or bathe every day.
Pretty smart, Dad.
Military shower.
One thing
Get wet, turn it off.
Yeah,
Soap
Navy
up.
showers, yeah.
One thing that kept me busy was the school teaching. I quit having them write down their names coming to class, to teach English and that. And the other thing is, I taught a group of nurses their religious training. One day, this lady showed up at my door, and I couldn't understand her at all. The gal right across the hall from me knew some English. She ran this nursing school, and so she wanted me to go and teach religion to her nurses. So I went and did that. I took Nara with me, and I taught them the gospel, and they were very receptive to a lot of that.
Was Nara your translator?
I used Nara to translate. They learned to sing, "I am a child of God and love one another," as did many children in school, with some of the school teachers who joined the church and taught them. One time I was asked by this nurse when all of the students, we went over to the hospital to visit the men who had been injured fighting in the war. And each one I talked to individually, he always asked me to pray for him. So I said a prayer for each soldier that we visited that day.
And which war was this?
With Azerbaijan. Armenia. The geographical size of Armenia now has shrunk down to a very small. At one time it was about 6 times larger than what it is today. So over 1,000 years it's sort of been shrunk down, so that Armenia is about 1/6 of what it was. So part of old Armenia is in Azerbaijan, and it's a place called Nagorno-Karabakh, and it's kind of an enclave inside the country of Azerbaijan. So Azerbaijanis had most of it, but in this middle there's kind of an enclave of Armenians. And so as long as they were under the USSR, the communists pretty much controlled everything. But once they became independent, then Azerbaijanis said, well, we want to get rid of all these Armenians in our geographical area here because we want that land. The Armenians said, no, you're not going to get it from us. And so they started a war there basically and fought over that, and they're still fighting over it. That's now 30 years. And they're still fighting for that. So that's what they were at war with. And I don't know, that'll likely go on forever, I suppose. But
We got quite a few interested people wanting to know about the gospel, so we started church, and we held it in our apartment. And sometimes our living room would be completely full of people there for church. One time, right in the middle of church, the lights went on, and they all yelled, "Congratulations." They were just eager and hungry for the gospel, and just wonderful people, and it was just a blessing to get to know them. Some days when the weather would be bad, Roy couldn't even go to work, and we would not even find time to eat. We had people there teaching them the gospel. So we were missionaries. Now, let's see, the two authorities who dedicated the land to the teaching of the gospel.
was Elder Oaks and Elder Nelson, I think it was.
Elder Oaks and Elder Nelson
Back in
dedicated.
1989.
When Russell M. Nelson was a general authority.
He was an apostle.
Or an
and
apostle.
He and Elder Oaks.
At the end of the street, there's a great big hill with steps that go way up. And on top of the hill is a statue of, they call her Mother Armenia. And this is where they dedicated the teaching of the gospel. So every year we were there, we went up to that very spot, and read the dedicatory prayer, and then we ate apricots. They were in season, and they were the best apricots I've ever eaten in my life.
Sounds wonderful.
Every day was a different experience. I could talk forever about things that I went through. It was wonderful.
So going back to the reason for being there, the cement plant that was built by Huntsman.